This is ChangeMakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
This week's ChangeMaker is Janet Abrahams, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. Janet joined Baltimore in 2017 after years of serving at three of some of the largest housing authorities in the country: Chicago, Newark, and New York City. Over the course of her 20-year career, she has played key roles in developing innovative approaches to improving affordable housing communities and the quality of life for its residents. Janet, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Katie. Thank you for having me.
It is great to have you here, and there's a bunch of topics that I want to cover with you. But first, I typically like to start by asking everyone how they found themselves in affordable housing. So why don't we start there, and maybe you just tell us, how did you come to work in affordable housing, or maybe what drew you to this particular industry?
So it was really interesting. And to be honest with you, I kind of fell into affordable housing. My major in college was social work. And so when I graduated, I started working in the social work field where my specialty was sexual abuse. And I worked for the state of Connecticut for many years doing just that, the social work program and what have you. And then I fell in love and moved to Chicago. And in Chicago, I remember when I got there, I worked for Volunteers of America. And I also was doing social work. I was a case manager. And I ended up going into one of the projects in Chicago. And I remember I didn't like the work that I was doing in Chicago because it wasn't fulfilling. And I started putting my resume out. And a company called William Moorhead and Associates contacted me and said they needed a caseworker because they were just taking over the Scatter Sites West program from the Housing Authority. I went over there as a caseworker, and they fired the entire staff after I had been there for about 2 months and asked me if I wanted to be the manager of the site at the time. And of course, my answer was no. I am a social worker, for Christ's sakes. I don't know anything about affordable housing, but what they did promise me, and they did, I will never forget them. They were the reason why I ended up in this industry. They taught me everything they knew, and I was able to get further education on my own and through them. And that's how I ended up where I am today.
When you describe what you do to your family, how do you put that into words then?
It's interesting because I grew up in public housing, and I always used to say to my family, I am one of the poster children of HUD, assisted housing. And so we always talk about that in a way because we all lived in public housing. We were part of the, years ago when I was growing up in public housing, they had so many programs that you can take advantage of. And so we talk about that a lot. And for my family, it's not an anomaly. They know exactly what I do because we have lived it, and they're really proud because they see some of the things that we're doing here in Baltimore and in other states where I have worked. And so that makes them feel good because they always felt that, especially my mom, when she was alive, she always felt like there was more that could be done and should be done to help families.
It's interesting. You called yourself the poster for affordable housing or public housing because, if anything, what you're saying is that you know how it can work.
Exactly. Because remember, the idea, public housing is supposed to be temporary. My family was serious about that. And we took advantage of all the programs that at the time I lived in Westbrook Village in Hartford, Connecticut. There were a lot of programs that they had back then that you can take advantage of, helped you with college, summer jobs. Upward Bound, I was part of Upward Bound that went to Miss Porter's School for Girls during the summertime. So, there were so many programs that existed back then. And so I took advantage of those programs. That's why I always say I'm the poster child.
So it sounds like you had great family support and buy-in. There were available programs. And then you mix that with stable housing. That's a combination that has really launched you forward to allow you to pursue your degrees and really advance your career. It sounds like your family dynamic is interesting. I mean, when you interact with residents or developers or staff, how do you use your family background to connect with them? I'm assuming it's natural and this is just a progression of who you are, but tell us how you incorporate that into where you are now.
Well, one of the things that I always ask myself, would I want my mother to live here? And I use that concept everywhere I go and everything that I do. When I am dealing with developers, when I am dealing with residents, I'm very very sympathetic to residents who are living in conditions that I know I personally would not want to live in. And so that has driven me over the years to make sure that we communicate that. And I also like dealing with developers that are like-minded, that share our mission. When you're dealing with developers that don't share your mission, that's where the problem is. So I like to make sure we're sharing our mission and vision. And a lot of these developers, they share that, because being in affordable housing in this industry is not a lucrative industry. And everyone knows it takes at least 17 different steps and financing tools just to get to a closing table. As opposed to the market rate, you go to the bank, you get a loan, and you do what you need to do. You really have to have a commitment in order to really be in this particular industry. And so that's what I look for when in dealing with developers, and I communicate that to them to make sure they understand where we're going and what we're trying to do.
Could you imagine if in every affordable housing community there were signs in the property management office or the maintenance offices or in the resident services areas that had signs that said, would I want my mother to live here? Or how would I respond if this was my mother? Could you imagine the radical customer service changes that we would see?
Definitely. And that's how I talk to my staff. I always say to them, you have to put yourself in their position. We all have issues. No one is absolved of any issues. When you come to work here, we're not telling you that your issues are not important, but when you walk through that door, you have to be able to separate it, and you have to be able to understand this resident's frustration. They have a leak in their ceiling that's been leaking for months and no one has done anything about it. Would you want to have a leak in your ceiling for months and no one has done anything about it? So and that's why here at the Housing Authority, we developed the 4 C's. And one of the 4 C's is customer service. And we have been doing a lot of training in customer service just to get back that feeling, because you become numb to certain things after a while.
And so many of us in the industry, we talk about unit numbers and addresses and client numbers and tenant numbers and numbers, numbers, numbers. And we forget about that personal connection of what is going on in that particular person's life. Name their name, know who they are, and know what the issues are. So maybe it's your background of social work and your degrees, or maybe it's just, your heart that you are making that connection for your staff. So that is a challenge for all of us in the industry to take note of what you just said here.
Exactly. It is. It's very difficult to really separate your personal issues and your personal beliefs and really treat people like they should be treated.
So tell us about your time in Chicago, New York, and Newark, and how you've brought those maybe commonalities or best practices, how you've brought those to Baltimore now.
Sure. I always, when I started working in the industry, you take a look at some of the positives and you take a look at some of the negatives, because that's not something I ever wanted to do, was to run an agency, believe it or not. But I always used to say, if I ever had to supervise people and deal with the public, how would you do it? So I started to take bits and pieces away from the different executive directors that I work with. And I've worked with some really great executive directors that really helped forge my way to where I am today. Overall, housing authorities, people tend to want to isolate and say, oh, we're different because this is a different city. They all have the same issues, right? We have long-term deferred maintenance. We have obsolete housing stock, and we have residents that deserve better living situation, and also programs to help them towards full family self-sufficiency. And so I have always had that mantra and able to look at how do you make the housing better? How do you bring more programs? How do you work with families that's really on this trajectory that they really have the same values. They want to get out of where they are. They're there temporarily. How do you do that? So all the different work that I have done was to make sure that I was preparing myself, even though I didn't want to be an ED, but just, making sure that we have those values that we can push forward. Working in Chicago really prepared me for relocation. I don't know if you remember back when the plan for transformation was adopted in Chicago, and there was this massive group, over 20 plus thousand of families that needed to be relocated. And that's where compassion came in. I worked with those groups, and so that really helped me to understand the regulations, what you can and cannot do, demolition. So overall, working in each one of them, except New York. New York was a different animal. New York, I introduced a different program, which was an asset management model. And there, working with those groups in the five boroughs helped me to really, really understand how the inner workings of a large agency, that everything is centralized, how difficult it is to manage. So I wanted to make sure when I came here, everything was decentralized and that people had the ability and were held accountable for what they were supposed to do. So that's really all the things that really prepared me for this job.
Well, you may not have wanted to set out and become CEO, but you're definitely your path has definitely progressed you here, and you're the right person with the right blended background too. So I think we need more of your types in this industry that have the core asset management understanding mixed with the personal delivery of services, because it's really adding to what Baltimore needs right now. So let's talk about Baltimore specifically. Why don't you give us some specific challenges that other places may not be experiencing? Any of those that you want to share with us?
Well, one of the things about Baltimore, it's not unique, but it's something that's hindering a lot of the progress that we can make here, is that Baltimore is about high 90 percentage of African Americans. And so because of that, the poverty level, of course, is low. And one of the biggest issues that we're having here, for example, we are in the process of implementing our strategic plan. So when I came here, we put together a strategic plan that really focused on how we as a housing authority will manage moving forward, and how we will reposition some of our assets to make sure that we bring them up to standards. And so we had, of course, buckets. We had the RAD buckets. And so we're still doing a lot of RAD conversions currently. We have converted over 24 of our high rises, which collectively was over $700+ million in those properties. We would never have been able to do that under the regular public housing model. We are also working very diligently to reposition some of our most vulnerable assets. And those are the ones, the family properties. We have gone after grants and done a lot of different things to really try to see how we can make it palatable for the residents, but at the same time have a good result project that our families can enjoy. One of the things that we're facing here is the concept of some of these properties are located in areas, they're not in areas of opportunity. And so they're located where they cannot pass the site and neighborhood standards. And so unless you have a redevelopment plan for the area, you will not be able to flip those properties using several different type of models. Maybe the RAD model, which doesn't work for these type of properties because of these are townhomes stretching over X amount of acreage. The issue that we're working from now is to one of the things that we will be doing in the next couple of weeks. I just finished in front of the planning commission is to try to get some plans adopted for these areas so that we can use that as leverage to let HUD know that there is a redevelopment plan for the area. Because the plan exists, we are the catalyst for change. So if we start the plan, then others will come. And I think the Perkins Somerset Old Town is a perfect example of that. I mean, people were redeveloping around our property. It pretty much was affectionately called the hole in the donut. And what we did was we created a plan that covers 244 acres that stretched over 5 different neighborhoods to make sure that we can show HUD and the public that we are serious about looking at neighborhood people and housing and stretching that across the area so that we can create a neighborhood of opportunity. That's some of the challenges that we face here in Baltimore. Of course, the blight issue here, a lot of vacant units, and then, of course, one of the other issues that just came about is that we are running out of landlords. Our landlords, because of COVID-19 and what happened with the moratorium on evictions and all the different pieces of legislation that went into that, landlords are now gun shy and refusing to lease
Right.
to our clientele. So that's also another big issue that we're facing here.
I want to circle back to the landlords and the blight, but let me touch on this redevelopment. You called it the hole in the donut, which is so
Yes,
fascinating. But you mentioned it was Perkins, Somerset, and I think you said Old Town areas, right?
exactly.
You're sort of in between the we have to go out and develop mixed use planning, but then you're also showing that you've done it too and that you can do it as a major, catalyst for entire neighborhoods. So on those specific areas that you mentioned, what were the additional, ads for the community as far as number of units, parks, other types of non-traditional development that was part of that specific package?
The Perkins Somerset Old Town plan, affectionately called the PSO, affectionately the hole in the donut. um, the reason why we call it the hole in the donut, if you were to get into a helicopter and fly around, you will see that they had the to the north, and I am directionally challenged. So, but anyway, they had Hopkins. They had EBDI, which is another housing program. They have the harbor. I mean, they were literally surrounded by all these beautiful neighborhoods, and they were just sitting in the middle where they literally had their own neighborhood. So, for example, Perkins Homes was its own neighborhood, as opposed to Fells Point, Butcher Hill, Little Italy, that kind of thing. So they really stuck out. And so what we did was we went to the residents and the stakeholders and we talked about what can we do to make this a more seamless community where everything kind of knit its way back into the communities, because Perkins touched on 5 areas because of how big it was. So you had a 629 unit property. And we all agreed that the best thing to do was to demolish the property. But demolishing the property, that's easy. What do you do after you demolish this site? And so one of the biggest concern were the residents. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to service those families, which we did. But we know when you look at a neighborhood, what it takes to really get it revitalized. So we went to the school. We negotiated to demolish 2 schools because they were really across the street from each other and underutilized. So we're talking 2 schools. And so we would be demolishing both schools and creating a 950 seat state of the art school in this community. Then we looked at the economic engine for this community. And there was this area called Old Town Mall. It was a pedestrian mall, and it was very vibrant years ago. But now it's just blighted, boarded up shops, and it's just not an area that you would want to go and open a shop today. So that's part of the entire redevelopment strategy. So in that area, we will have parking structures. We still will have a pedestrian mall. We have added 150-door hotel. We will have restaurants. We also will have an incubator. And this incubator is for the community. So anyone who wants to invest in a small business, the incubator will be their startup so that they'll be able to grow from there and then go and become, open their own store or whatever endeavor they want to do. And then, of course, you will have some townhomes in that area also that will definitely just kind of pull the community back together. And next door to that, you will have 4 buildings, which is the Somerset side, and we're bringing a grocery store. This is a food desert. We're also bringing in 2 parks and some small pocket parks around the buildings. And there is another park, which is owned by the city, City Springs Park. It has a swimming pool. So we brought them in also. And so they will be doing the remodeling for that park. And then the Chick Webb Community Center, which was named after a musician, well-known musician here, that community center will be completely refurbished. So it's a lot going on. And we're tearing down 629 units, but at the end of the day, we're bringing back 1,360 units of housing, which include the replacement housing. But at the end of the entire plan, with all the different investments that's happening, we'll have over 2,000 new affordable units in that footprint.
Wow, that is amazing. Not just the amenities and the schools and the parks, but the fact that you're doubling the amount of units. So that is not often done. I mean, typically you see demolishing 600, replacing with 300 or
Right.
something that doesn't have quite the substantial impact. So this is a great, great innovative moment for you and your team.
Oh, yeah. And this came to light with the Choice Neighborhood Initiative grants from HUD, which was a $30 million grant and it's not to solve all the problem. What it does, that grant, the specialty is to spark investment in an
Right.
area so that you can, and that's exactly what it has done. When we're through with this particular plan, we will see over $1 billion worth of investment in this footprint.
Yeah, how many times do you think if you were given a choice neighborhood could just spend it? Like that's one choice neighborhood award, but if they gave you 5 more, I predict you could spend all 5 of them, couldn't you?
Oh, exactly. Matter of fact, we intend to apply for a second grant next year. We're getting ready now, putting together, because it's really a long process. So we're starting that process, the kickoff, so we can get that a very robust application, a competitive application, because it's a very competitive grant.
Well, we're going to wish you the best on that. And on that note, let's take a break. But coming up in the second part of my talk with Janet Abrahams, the president and CEO of the Housing Authority of Baltimore, Janet shares the secret to her team's success in the Charm City.
We've been successful because we have really worked hard to make sure the message is clear. We get the message out, being extremely transparent to say, at the end of the day, this is what can happen here in this area. And this is how much investment Baltimore can get if we are able to really close on these deals.
Thanks for listening to ChangeMakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.